The galaxy had many rulers, but none were feared as much as Queen Zira of the Dominion. She was called the deadliest queen because her reign was built on blood, war, and victory. Entire star systems had fallen to her fleets. Whole species bent, the knee or were erased from history. Yet despite her power, she was not satisfied. Conquest grew dull. The people of the Dominion whispered that nothing entertained her anymore, except the games. The Queen's gladiatorial games were legendary. In the largest arena of the capital world, she brought champions, monsters, and prisoners from across the stars. They fought until the sand turned red, and the crowds roared as though the survival of the galaxy depended on the outcome. To Zira, the arena was more than sport. It was a test of dominance. Every warrior she crushed under her gaze reminded the galaxy who ruled them. But after years of victories, even the games began to bore her. She had seen too many champions fight by the same rules, the same strategies, the same desperation. It all blended into one endless stream of battles. None of them surprised her. None of them challenged her belief that she was untouchable. She longed for something different, something that could stir her cold heart. That was when she made her new demand. Standing in the throne chamber before hundreds of nobles, generals, and diplomats, Queen Zira rose from her seat of black stone. Her tall frame gleamed in armor that looked more like art than metal, and her crown of curved spikes seemed to pierce the very air. Her voice carried across the hall, sharp and commanding. "Bring me a gladiator from Earth." The chamber fell, silent. The word echoed like a strange song. Earth. Many of the Dominion nobles frowned, confused. Earth was a backwater world on the edge of known space. Its technology was advancing, yes, but compared to the Dominion, it was still young and untested. Its people had no part in the galactic order. To many, they were irrelevant. One bold general spoke. "Your Majesty, why Earth? Their warriors are untrained. Their weapons primitive. Surely we can summon a champion from the Zarek clans or the Valar legions. Why waste your time on humans?" Zira's eyes narrowed. "Because humans are unpredictable." She leaned forward, her tone laced with something dangerous. "I have read the reports. They adapt to anything. They improvise in war. They rise from defeat when others would surrender. I want to see it for myself. I want to see if their chaos can amuse me." None dared to argue further. When the Queen gave a command, it was law. Envoys were dispatched to Earth with her demand. Refusal was not an option. To deny her would mean the Dominion's wrath, something Earth could not survive. On Earth, the demand caused panic. The United Earth Council gathered in secret chambers, voices rising with worry. Some argued to resist, to reject the Queen's order outright. Others knew it was impossible. Earth's fleets were no match for the Dominion. Refusal meant annihilation. They had to send someone. But who? Names were suggested. Famous athletes, decorated soldiers, even genetically modified super soldiers. But the Dominion's envoys shook their heads at every option. "The Queen will choose," they said coldly. "Do not insult her with your lists. We will take who she accepts." In the end, Earth had no say. The Dominion's envoys scoured military bases, training academies, and records. They dismissed the polished and the perfect. They ignored medals and ranks. And somehow, perhaps by chance, perhaps by design, they ended up in a rundown training yard on the coast, where one particular man was being disciplined. Corporal Jack Mason was not what anyone would call a model soldier. He was strong, yes. Brave, without question. But disciplined? Not exactly. Mason had a reputation for trouble. He followed orders when it suited him, and when it didn't, he improvised. Sometimes his improvisation saved lives. Other times it nearly got his unit killed. Commanders couldn't decide if he was brilliant or reckless. Most agreed he was both. At that very moment, Mason stood shirtless in front of his superior officer, a bruise forming on his jaw. He had gotten into a bar fight the night before. Again. The story was simple. Some local toughs insulted the Marine Corps, Mason threw a punch, and the rest spiraled out of control. Chairs broke, tables shattered, and by the time the MPs arrived, Mason was standing on the counter, holding a beer in one hand and a broken bottle in the other, laughing like a madman. His superior sighed. "You're a disaster, Mason." Jack smirked. A glorious disaster, sir. Before his punishment could be handed out, the Dominion envoys entered the base. Their tall frames, cloaked in shimmering robes, filled the room with tension. They studied Mason with strange, unblinking eyes. He stood there, still shirtless, still bruised, and gave them a lazy salute. Let me guess, Jack said with a grin. You're not here to buy me a drink, the envoys whispered among themselves, then turned to Earth's officials. This one, they said. The Queen will see this one. Everyone stared in disbelief. Out of all the choices, out of all the carefully selected candidates, they picked Corporal Jack Mason? A troublemaker, a soldier with no plan. But the envoys insisted. Refusal would insult the Queen, and so Mason was chosen. He was given little time to prepare. Within hours, he was on a Dominion ship, bound for the capital world. Earth's leaders tried to brief him, tried to load him with strategies, survival tactics, and cultural rules. Mason listened for a while, then waved it all off. Look, he said, leaning back in his seat, arms crossed. I've been in worse fights with less notice. You're overthinking it. It's just another brawl, right? This isn't a bar. Fight, Corporal, one diplomat snapped. This is the most dangerous arena in the galaxy. You need to plan. Mason shrugged. Plans are just a fancy way of saying what'll go wrong first. I'll figure it out when I'm there. The diplomats exchanged horrified glances. But it was too late. The Dominion ship carried him away. The journey through hyperspace was a blur. Mason spent most of it doing push-ups, shadowboxing, and telling jokes that the Dominion guards didn't understand. To them, he looked like a fool. But Mason didn't care. He had always faced life with the same philosophy. Don't stop. Moving forward. Plans failed. Rules broke. But momentum kept you alive. When the ship finally emerged from hyperspace, the sight before him was breathtaking. The Dominion capital world was a jewel of stars, a planet wrapped in rings of light, with towers that touched the atmosphere and ships swarming like insects. And at its heart stood the Colosseum of Zira, the largest arena in the galaxy. Its walls were carved from black stone, glowing with alien symbols. The roar of the crowd inside was so loud it shook the air outside. Mason whistled. Well, that's not intimidating at all. Inside the palace, Queen Zira awaited him. She sat upon her throne, her gaze sharp as a blade. Her generals and nobles stood at her side, watching with sneers. When Mason entered, shirtless, bruised and grinning, the hall erupted in laughter. This is your Gladiator? One noble scoffed. A half-dressed primitive? Mason looked around, unimpressed. Nice place. Could use a pool table, though. The nobles gasped at his insolence, but Queen Zira raised a hand, silencing them. Her eyes locked on Mason, studying him as though he were a puzzle. You are the champion Earth sends to me? She asked coldly. Champions, a strong word, Mason replied. I just fight until the other guy doesn't feel like it anymore. The Queen tilted her head. There was no fear in his eyes. No trembling, no false humility. Just raw confidence, or madness. Perhaps both. For the first time in years, she felt a spark of curiosity. You will fight in my arena, she declared. You will face my champions, my beasts, my machines. And when you fall, your world will remember that Earth's best was not enough. Mason cracked his knuckles, smiling. Guess I'll just have to disappoint you. The chamber fell silent. Even the generals could not believe his arrogance. But Queen Zira... She leaned back in her throne, lips curling into the faintest smile. The morning of the games arrived, and the capital world of the Dominion shook with excitement. Across its towering cities, people gathered in plazas to watch giant holoscreens. In orbit, ships tuned into the broadcast. From the deepest mines to the highest palaces, citizens whispered the same words. The Queen has chosen a human. Few had ever seen a human before. Rumors spread quickly. Some said they were weak and clumsy. Others claimed they were wild beasts with no manners. Most believed this human would not survive even a single round in the arena. To them, it was not a question of if he would die, but how fast. Inside the preparation chamber beneath the arena, Jack Mason stretched lazily. He was shirtless as always, wearing only simple combat trousers and boots. Around him, Dominion handlers, moved nervously, offering armor, weapons, and advice. Mason waved them off. "Too heavy," he said, shoving away a chest plate. "Too complicated," he muttered, tossing aside a plasma spear. "Too boring," he added, ignoring a shield bristling with energy spikes. One of the handlers, a thin alien with 4 arms, finally snapped. "You fool! Do you not understand? You face death itself. The beasts of the Queen's arena have devoured champions from 10 systems. Without armor, without weapons, you will be nothing but food." Mason grinned. "Then I'll just have to make sure I taste terrible." The alien groaned and stormed out. Above, the Queen sat in her throne box overlooking the arena. Her generals gathered near, armored and proud. The nobles filled their golden seats while thousands of citizens packed the stone stands. The roar of their voices made the ground vibrate. Queen Zyra raised her hand, and silence fell. Her voice rang out, sharp and commanding. "Today the Dominion witnesses the first battle of the human champion. Earth dares to send this one, a soldier without rank, without honor, without plan. Watch as he falls to the glory of the arena. Watch as his chaos ends beneath my will." The crowd cheered wildly, stomping their feet, waving banners, eager for blood. Then the gates opened. Jack Mason walked into the sunlight, squinting at the massive arena. The sand stretched wide, dotted with broken pillars, jagged rocks, and ancient ruins left there to serve as cover. The crowd booed and laughed when they saw him shirtless, carrying nothing but a small dagger he had borrowed from a careless guard. Mason looked around, scratched his head, and muttered, "Big sandbox. Guess recess is starting." The opposite gate thundered open. Out stepped his opponent, a towering reptilian beast with armored scales, 4 clawed arms, and a jaw wide enough to swallow a man whole. Chains rattled as handlers struggled to control it, but once the beast smelled the air, it roared so loud the stands shook. The chains snapped, and the creature charged forward. The crowd screamed with delight. Mason tilted his head, unimpressed. "That's a big lizard. Hope it's house-trained." He didn't run, he didn't panic. Instead, he waited until the beast lunged. At the last moment, Mason dove to the side, rolling in the sand. The creature's claws smashed into the ground, where he had stood, sending dust flying. Mason sprang up laughing. "Close one, buddy, almost got me." The crowd gasped. Few gladiators dodged so casually. The beast roared again and attacked with both claws. Mason ducked under one, slid between its legs, and slapped its tail as he passed. "Tag, you're it!" he shouted. The crowd erupted in confused laughter. Even the Queen raised an eyebrow. Mason had no strategy, no formal technique. Instead, he relied on instinct, speed, and constant movement. He darted between broken pillars, using them as cover. The beast smashed them apart, but each time Mason slipped away, throwing sand in its eyes, kicking its legs, or yelling insults to keep it angry. When the beast tried to bite him, Mason shoved the dagger into its gums, not to kill, but to annoy. The creature howled, thrashing wildly. Mason clung to its back like a rodeo rider, grinning as the crowd roared with surprise. "Come on, big guy," he yelled, gripping the beast's spines. "I've ridden worse after a night at the bar." The generals in the Queen's box shook their heads in disbelief. "This is madness," one muttered. "He plays with death as if it is a game." But Queen Zyra leaned forward. Her sharp eyes studied every movement. For the first time in years, she felt the spark of genuine interest. The beast finally slammed Mason against a stone wall, knocking the wind out of him. For a moment he staggered, his grin fading. The creature reared back to finish him. The crowd cheered, certain the fight was over. But Mason spotted something, a broken pillar leaning at an angle, held up by crumbling sand. As the beast lunged, Mason dove aside. The creature's weight smashed the pillar loose. With a thunderous crack, the stone toppled directly onto the beast's skull. The arena shook as dust filled the air. When it cleared, the reptilian monster lay still, crushed beneath the fallen stone. Silence fell. Then slowly the crowd erupted, not in laughter this time, but in cheers. Against all odds, the human had won. Mason stood in the center of the arena, bruised and bloody but smiling. He raised his arms to the crowd, shouting, "Still standing!" The people roared. Even those who had mocked him minutes before now shouted his name. Mason bowed dramatically as though the fight had been a performance. Up in her throne, Queen Zira did not smile, but her eyes glittered. This human had survived, not with strength or training, but with chaos, courage, and stubborn will. He had turned a hopeless fight into a spectacle. Interesting, she murmured. Her generals protested. Your Majesty, this proves nothing. He was lucky. Chance cannot defy the Dominion forever. Zyra raised a hand to silence them. She continued to watch Mason as he left the arena, limping but unbroken. The spark inside her grew brighter. She had demanded a gladiator to cure her boredom, and Earth had sent her something far stranger, a man with no plan who refused to die. Back in the preparation chambers, Dominion healers rushed to treat Mason. He pushed them away, laughing. I've had hangovers worse than this. You guys worry too much. One of the handlers stared at him in awe. You are insane. No one mocks the arena and lives. Mason shrugged. Guess today's full of surprises. He leaned back on a bench, closing his eyes, but behind his easy grin his mind replayed the fight. He had barely survived. The beast had been stronger, faster, deadlier, yet somehow he had won. And deep down, he knew why. Humans didn't stop. They kept fighting, even when the odds were impossible. Somewhere above, the Queen was watching. Mason grinned. If she wanted entertainment, she was going to get it. That night, across the Dominion, people whispered about the human. The holoscreens replayed his fight over and over. The shirtless Marine dodging death, laughing at danger, toppling a beast twice his size. Some mocked him still, saying his luck would run out. But others felt something new. Hope. Because if a single human could defy the Queen's arena, maybe her dominion wasn't as invincible as everyone believed, and Queen Zira, alone, in her chambers, thought the same. She stared at the stars through her window, wondering what more this reckless human could do. For the first time in many years, she felt anticipation. The games had only begun. The name of Jack Mason spread through the Dominion like fire across dry grass. In a single day, he went from being a strange Earth soldier to the talk of the galaxy. Markets buzzed with his image on glowing signs. Storytellers exaggerated his every move. Some claimed he had punched the beast with bare fists until it begged for mercy. Others said he had stared into its eyes and made it collapse out of fear. No matter the version, one thing was certain. The human had done what no one expected. He survived. In the Queen's palace, nobles whispered nervously. If Mason continued to win, his legend would grow. If his legend grew too large, it could inspire the common people. Already, in the lower districts, citizens shouted his name during the night. Mason. Mason. The sound unsettled the nobles who lived their lives under the shadow of the Queen's control. But Queen Zira herself was not unsettled. She was intrigued. From her throne, she watched the recordings of Mason's first battle. His every move seemed careless, yet every choice worked in his favor. He mocked danger, played with it, twisted it into something the crowd could not look away from. Her generals dismissed him as lucky. Her advisors called him a clown, but Zira knew better. Luck is not enough to win the hearts of millions, she whispered to herself. There is something else here. She ordered more battles. In the next fight, Mason faced two gladiators from the Zoric clans, warriors known for their double-bladed axes and unbreakable discipline. They towered over him, their bodies covered in scarred armor. 2 against 1, Mason muttered as he entered the arena. Hope they at least take turns. The crowd laughed, some booed, and the Queen leaned forward, eager to see what the human would do. The Zoric attacked with perfect coordination, their blades slicing the air in deadly patterns. Mason had no shield, no armor, only the short sword, tossed at his feet. He picked it up, gave it a spin, and then threw it like a dart. It clattered uselessly against a pillar. The crowd roared with laughter. The Zoric snarled and charged, but Mason wasn't fighting them head-on. He dodged left and right, rolling under their swings, taunting them at every turn. Nice swing. Try using 2 hands. Oh wait, you already are. The warriors grew frustrated. Their perfect rhythm broke. They began to chase him instead of working together. Mason led them in circles, weaving around broken pillars, tripping them with ropes from the ruins, throwing sand in their eyes. Finally, when one warrior stumbled into the other, Mason kicked both at once, sending them crashing into a wall. The crowd gasped. Before they could rise, Mason leapt on top of them, slamming their helmets together with a loud clang. Both collapsed, stunned. Mason raised his hands to the cheering crowd. "Teamwork makes the dream work," the stadium erupted, with laughter and applause. Even those who hated him could not deny he had turned the fight into theater. By the third battle, the Dominion began to notice a pattern. Mason never fought the way others did. He never used the strongest weapons. He never followed rules or strategies. Instead, he turned every match into a performance, making the crowd part of the fight. Against the Valar duelist, he pretended to trip, only to rise and catch the alien off guard. Against a pack of armored beasts, he lured them into smashing each other while he stood on the sidelines, clapping like a spectator. Against a mechanical war drone, he climbed onto its back, hammered at its controls with his fists, and shouted, "I don't know what this button does, but let's find out," before shutting it down completely. Each time, the audience screamed with delight. Each time, the Queen's interest grew, but not everyone shared her fascination. In the War Council chamber, the generals gathered with grim faces. Holographic images of Mason flickered above the table. His name echoed across their reports. His face appeared on banners carried by cheering citizens in the lower levels of the city. "This human is dangerous," one general growled. "Not because of his strength, but because of his influence. The people laugh with him, they cheer for him, they chant his name." Already there are whispers. If he can defeat the Queen's champions, then maybe the Queen herself is not invincible. Another general slammed his fist on the table. "He is a spark, and sparks start fires. We must extinguish him before he burns the Dominion." But Queen Zira entered the chamber, her gaze silencing them all. "You fear him," she said. "Good. That means he is worth my attention." One general dared to protest. "Your Majesty, he undermines your power. Every time he wins, the people see hope. Hope is poison." Zira's eyes narrowed. "Hope can also be a chain if I hold the key." The generals bowed, unwilling to argue further. But inside, they plotted. If the Queen would not destroy Mason, they would find a way. Meanwhile, Mason himself seemed unaware of the storm brewing around him. In the barracks beneath the arena, he lounged on a bench, juggling pieces of fruit he had stolen from a tray. "You realize they want you dead, right?" muttered a handler watching him. "They always want me dead," Mason replied casually. "It keeps life exciting." "You don't understand," the handler insisted. "The generals fear you. If you win too much, they will cheat. They will send assassins. They will rig battles." Mason caught the fruit, took a bite, and grinned. "Good. I'd hate for things to get boring." The very next night, the first attempt came. As Mason returned to his quarters, a shadow detached itself from the wall. A Dominion assassin, cloaked in black, lunged with a poisoned blade. Mason reacted without thinking. He ducked, grabbed the assassin's arm, and twisted. The blade sank into the wall instead. Mason headbutted the attacker, snatched the blade, and tossed it aside. "Look, pal," Mason said, holding the dazed assassin against the wall. "If you want my autograph, just ask." The assassin snarled, breaking free, and fled. Mason sighed, shaking his head. "Guess I'm popular." The Queen heard of the attempt, but said nothing. Instead, she summoned Mason to her throne. For the first time, they spoke without an audience. Zira sat tall, her eyes sharp as knives. Mason entered with his usual grin, shirtless as ever. "You risk much by mocking my arena," she said. "Why do you fight this way?" Mason shrugged. "Because it works." "You think chaos is a weapon?" "I think chaos is fun," he replied, "and people like fun. Even your people." The Queen studied him in silence. Few dared to speak to her so casually. Yet she could not deny the truth. The people did enjoy him. They loved him. He had done what none of her generals could. He made the Dominion cheer not for fear but for joy. "Be careful, human," she warned. "Joy can turn into rebellion." Mason smirked. "Maybe. Or maybe it just makes life worth living." There, conversation was cut short by a messenger. The next battle was ready. The queen dismissed Mason, but her eyes lingered as he left. She was not sure if she wanted him destroyed or preserved. The next arena challenge was designed to break him. 3 opponents at once, a Valar duelist, a Zoric warrior, and a Dominion war drone. The general smiled, certain this would be the end. The crowd screamed as the fight began. The 3 enemies closed in from every side. But Mason didn't panic. He dodged, rolled, and laughed, drawing the duelist into the warrior's path, shoving the war drone so its blasts struck his enemies instead of him. He used the arena itself, leaping off walls, ducking behind ruins, and turning every attack into an accident that hurt someone else. At one point, he slid under the drone, smacked it on the back, and shouted, "Bad robot, sit!" The crowd howled with laughter. When the dust settled, all 3 enemies lay defeated. Mason stood, bruised but alive, arms raised high. The crowd chanted his name until the walls shook. High above, Queen Zira leaned back in her throne, her eyes burning with a strange light. Against her will, she smiled. Her generals looked on with dread. The spark was no longer a spark. It was a fire, and no one knew if it could be controlled. The roar of Mason's name had become impossible to ignore. From the lowest worker in the mines to the merchants in golden towers, people shouted for the human who laughed at danger and turned every battle into a story. At first, the queen's generals had thought the cheers were harmless. But now the sound spread beyond the arenas. Soldiers in the Dominion army whispered Mason's name while cleaning their weapons. Children played games in the streets pretending to be him. Traders sold carved figures of a shirtless human holding broken weapons. The spark had become fire, and the generals were terrified. In the council chamber, the generals gathered with stormy faces. "He cannot be allowed to continue," one growled. "He is not just a gladiator anymore. He is a symbol." "Every victory he wins is a wound to your authority, Majesty," another warned. "Already, citizens compare his laughter to your silence. They cheer him more than they fear you. That is dangerous." Queen Zira sat on her throne of blackstone, listening without expression. She knew their words carried truth. Mason had become more than entertainment. His chaos was not only in the arena, it was spreading through the Dominion itself. And yet, she could not bring herself to end him. For years, her life had been a chain of repetition. Battles, victories, executions, always the same. But Mason shattered that pattern. His madness, his defiance, his refusal to bow had stirred something inside her. Curiosity, amusement, perhaps even admiration. Still, she could not ignore the rising pressure. "Then we will give him a challenge he cannot overcome," Zira said at last. "If he wins, he proves himself worthy. If he loses, his legend dies with him." The generals bowed. They already knew the challenge she meant. Deep beneath the arena, in vaults guarded for centuries, rested the Colossus. It was not a beast of flesh, but a machine of war, built during the Dominion's rise, forged to crush armies by itself. The Ilaski Colossus stood 3 stories tall, its body covered in black armor plates, its arms ending in blades that could slice through starship hulls. Its single eye glowed like molten fire, and its heart pulsed with the power of ancient reactors. No gladiator had ever faced it and lived. To release the Colossus was not just to test a champion, it was to declare judgment. When Mason heard of his next fight, he raised an eyebrow. "They're sending me a giant killer robot?" he asked, tossing an apple in the air. His handler nodded, grimly. "Not just a robot. The Colossus, it was made to end wars. You cannot win." Mason caught the apple, took a bite, and shrugged. "Sounds like fun." "You don't understand," the handler snapped. "Its armor is unbreakable. Its weapons are unstoppable. This is not a fight. It is an execution." Mason grinned. "Then, I'll just have to do something stupid enough to work." The day of the battle, the arena was filled with more people than ever before. Word had spread across the galaxy. The human would face the Colossus. Ships from distant systems crowded into orbit. Millions tuned in across the Dominion. Queen Zira sat in her throne, her gaze cold and unreadable. She had chosen this test, but part of her wondered, did she want Mason to fail? Or did she secretly hope he would do the impossible again? The gates opened. The Colossus marched out first, its footsteps shaking the ground. Each step rang like thunder. The crowd gasped as the massive machine raised its blade arms, energy humming around them. The sand smoked beneath its feet. Then Mason strolled out, shirtless as always, holding nothing but a short spear he had found leaning against the gate. He looked up at the towering machine and whistled. "Well," he said, loud enough for the crowd to hear, "I've fought ugly before, but this guy takes the trophy." The crowd laughed nervously. The Colossus raised its arm and pointed at Mason. The fight began. The machine charged, faster than its size suggested. Mason dove aside, rolling in the sand as the Colossus's blade smashed into the ground, splitting stone like paper. Dust exploded into the air. "Okay, note to self," Mason muttered, sprinting for cover. "Don't get hit." The Colossus turned, its single eye glowing. Energy beams shot from its chest, burning holes into the ground where Mason had been. The crowd screamed as the human darted between ruins, barely staying ahead of the blasts. For the first time, Mason felt the weight of real danger. This wasn't just a beast he could annoy or gladiators he could trick. This was a war machine, built to destroy anything in its path. One wrong move, and he would be nothing but ashes. But giving up was not in his nature. He ran, he dodged, he climbed over broken pillars as the Colossus smashed them apart. The ground shook with every step of the machine. Mason's lungs burned, his body ached, but he kept moving. Then he noticed something. Each time the Colossus fired its energy beams, its chest plate glowed brighter, and its movements slowed for a second. "Ah," Mason whispered with a grin. "So you do have a weak spot." He picked up a broken piece of pillar and hurled it at the Colossus's chest. The stone shattered harmlessly, but the glow flickered for a moment. Mason laughed. "Gotcha." He began to taunt the machine, drawing its fire. Each time it blasted, he dove closer, rolling under its legs, scrambling over its feet. The crowd gasped as the tiny human climbed the giant like an insect. Mason hammered at its armor with his fists, shouting, "Open up, you oversized tin can!" The Colossus tried to shake him off, slamming itself against walls, smashing its own armor in the process. Sparks flew as Mason clung to its back, yanking at wires, kicking panels loose. But the effort cost him. A swing from its arm caught him mid-leap, sending him crashing into the sand. Pain exploded in his ribs. He gasped, struggling to rise. For a moment, the arena fell silent. Was this the end? The Colossus raised both arms, ready to crush him. Mason spat blood, gritted his teeth, and forced himself up. Not today. He staggered toward the broken ruins. His eyes locked on a massive shard of metal, half buried in the sand, a piece of an old arena gate. Too heavy to lift, but maybe not too heavy to push. As the Colossus lumbered closer, Mason braced himself against the shard. He waited until the machine's chest glowed again, charging another blast. Then with a roar, he shoved the shard upright and angled it like a mirror. The Colossus fired. The beam struck the shard and bounced, back slamming into the machine's chest. The crowd screamed as the Colossus staggered, its armor cracking, its eye flickering wildly. Mason didn't stop. He ran straight for it, leapt onto its chest, and drove his stolen spear deep into the cracked plate. With a final burst of sparks and a deafening roar, the Colossus collapsed, shaking the entire arena as it fell. Silence filled the stadium. Dust hung in the air. The giant machine lay broken, smoke rising from its shattered core, and then Mason climbed out of the wreckage, bruised, bleeding, but smiling. He raised his fist to the sky and shouted, "Still standing!" The crowd exploded. The cheers were louder than ever before, shaking the city itself. Mason's name rolled like thunder across the Dominion. Up in her throne, Queen Zyra sat frozen. She had expected his death. She had prepared herself to end his legend. But instead, he had done the impossible again. He had defeated the Colossus. Her generals stared at her, horrified. If the human was a spark before, now he was a flame no storm could put out. Zyra's eyes narrowed. Inside, her heart twisted with conflict. He was dangerous, yes. He could inspire rebellion. But he was also magnificent. For the first time in years, the deadliest queen did not know what she wanted. That night, Mason lay in his quarters, every bone in his body aching. He knew he had barely survived. He knew the next fight would be even worse. But as He closed his eyes, he grinned, because he also knew something else. The galaxy was watching, and he wasn't done yet. The galaxy had never seen a gladiator like Jack Mason. After defeating the Colossus, his name echoed across worlds. In marketplaces, children wore masks of his face. Hollow recordings of his battles were studied by students and soldiers alike. Citizens whispered that he was more than a fighter. He was a symbol of hope, courage, and the strange power of humanity. Queen Zira sat in her throne watching the excitement spread. She had intended the Colossus to end Mason's journey, to crush the human before his legend grew too large. But, now, the human still lived, still laughed, still won. She felt something she had not felt in decades, curiosity, and something stranger, admiration. Yet her mind wrestled with danger. Every victory Mason achieved weakened her grip on the Dominion. Her generals urged her to act, to end the human before he became unstoppable. But Zira hesitated. Something about Mason was different. He did not seek power. He did not plot conquest. He only fought to survive, to push forward, to turn every challenge into a spectacle. That defiance intrigued her more than any army, any machine, or any strategy ever had. The next day, the queen summoned Mason to her throne room. The arena had emptied, leaving the human and the monarch alone. Mason entered, still shirtless, his clothes worn and torn from the Colossus fight. He carried no weapons, yet his presence seemed to fill the vast chamber. "Your Majesty," Mason said casually.
"Hope I didn't break anything yesterday."
"Those machines are always so dramatic." Zira's expression was unreadable. "You continue to survive, human. Each victory spreads your influence across my empire. Citizens speak your name more than mine. Generals fear you, and yet, you are still alive. Why?" Mason shrugged, leaning against a pillar. "Because I don't quit. You don't stop moving forward, and you don't let the odds scare you. That's what humans do." The queen's sharp eyes studied him. Few dared to speak so boldly, and fewer still had survived after such boldness. Yet Mason smiled, relaxed, as if danger was part of the joke. "You are reckless," Zira said finally. "And yet, fascinating. Tell me, do you even know what it means to fight for honor, not survival?" Mason shook his head. "I fight to stay alive mostly. But if people cheer me along the way, that's a bonus." For hours, they spoke. Mason did not flinch, and the queen did not threaten. Instead, she asked questions about Earth, about humans, about his strange way of turning every battle into laughter and performance. Mason answered freely, without fear or flattery. By the end of their conversation, the queen realized something extraordinary. Mason's victories were not just due to skill or luck. They were the result of something she could never command: spirit. Humanity had a force of will that machines, armies, and even empires could not fully understand or control. "Your victories. They inspire," Zira admitted quietly. "Not because you are stronger than my champions, but because you refuse to be broken. That is something I cannot train, cannot order, cannot replicate." Mason grinned. "Guess I'm lucky like that." The queen rose from her throne, moving closer to him. Her presence was immense, a weight that few could bear. "The next fight could be your last, human. The Dominion expects you to die in the arena. The generals have prepared champions designed to crush you. If you survive, then perhaps you are more than a fighter. Perhaps you are exceptional." Mason scratched his head. "Sounds like a fun day at work. Who am I fighting?" "Creatures from 5 different star systems. Champions trained their whole lives. You will be outnumbered, outmatched, and surrounded. And yet, you may still live." "Perhaps." Mason smiled. "Well, you always did like a challenge, didn't you?" Zira did not answer, only studied him. She realized she wanted to see him live, not for his survival, but for the fire he sparked in her own mind. He was chaos, and yet he made her feel alive. The arena was prepared like never before. Massive gates opened to reveal the largest challenge Mason had faced yet. 5 warriors from different corners of the galaxy, each trained to kill, each armed, with weapons that had ended countless lives, waited for him. The crowd cheered wildly. They had witnessed Mason defy death before. Now, they wondered, could he survive again? Mason walked into the arena, unarmed and shirtless, laughing. "All right, big guys," he said to the warriors, "let's see what you've got." The first warrior lunged. Mason dodged, rolling in the sand, weaving through obstacles. The second tried to strike from above. Mason ducked, kicking sand into its eyes. The third swung a heavy weapon. Mason ducked again, using its own momentum to throw it off balance. Each opponent attacked with coordination, but Mason turned their own tactics against them. He feinted, he leapt, he improvised, using pillars, ropes, and even his enemy's weapons to his advantage. Each time he survived, the crowd erupted, unable to believe what they saw. By the end of the battle, only Mason remained standing. The 5 warriors lay defeated, bruised, and exhausted. Mason raised his arms to the crowd, laughing, shouting, "Who's next?" The citizens screamed, throwing flowers, cheering, and chanting his name. Mason had not only survived, he had turned an impossible fight into a spectacle of ingenuity and courage. Up in her throne, Queen Zira's face softened. The human had done what none could have imagined. He had survived every challenge, not with raw strength or cunning, but with spirit. And for the first time, she realized that his spirit was more valuable than any weapon, more impressive than any army. After the battle, Mason was summoned to the palace again. Queen Zira awaited him in the throne room, silent and composed. The generals stood behind her, unsure whether to fear or respect the human. "You have survived," Zira said finally. "Against impossible odds, you have conquered the arena. Against logic and expectation, you continue to rise. You are remarkable." Mason smiled, brushing sand from his trousers. "Thanks, Your Majesty. Guess I just don't know when to quit." She studied him closely. "I must make a choice. The Dominion expects me to punish you. My generals demand it, but you are unlike any champion I have seen. You inspire loyalty and admiration without trying. You face death with laughter, not fear. And in that you are different." Mason tilted his head. "So, what's the verdict?" Zira paused, then spoke with a calm authority that made the entire room quiet. "I do not kill you, not because you are my champion, not because of your victories, but because I wish to see what you can become. I declare you the champion of the Dominion, and my personal protector." The generals gasped. To name a human as protector of the deadliest queen was unheard of. It was unthinkable. But Zira's decision was final. She had chosen. Mason blinked, then grinned. "Well, that's new. Don't tell my unit back home. They'll never believe it." Word spread across the galaxy faster than any weapon. The deadliest queen had chosen a human, not as a gladiator, but as her champion, her protector, her equal in courage. For Mason, the future was uncertain. He had survived every battle, defied every expectation, and now held a place beside the most powerful ruler in the Dominion. Yet he faced no fear, only excitement. The galaxy was vast, full of challenges, full of stories waiting to be written. And for the first time, he would not fight merely to survive, but to inspire. Queen Zira, too, found herself changed. She had chosen to preserve chaos, to embrace unpredictability. Mason was more than a human. He was a mirror, reflecting a part of her own curiosity and daring that she had long buried beneath the weight of power. Together, they would shape the galaxy in ways neither could fully imagine. And as Mason looked up at the stars from the palace balcony, shirtless and smiling, he whispered, "Well, let's see how far this adventure goes."